A book published earlier this year intimately analyzes one of the most notable writers in American history. It's called Savage Journey, Hunter S. Thompson and the Weird Road to Gonzo. The book studies the literary formation, achievement, and continuing relevance of the eponymous 20th century author and journalist. Thompson was one of the founders of Gonzo Journalism. Joining us now is the book's author, Peter Richardson. He is a lecturer at San Francisco State University. Thanks so much for being with us.
Thank you for having me, Nicole.
First, I want you to start off by explaining to viewers who may not have a firm grasp, who was Hunter S. Thompson and what was the Gonzo journalism movement?
Right. Well, it was over 50 years ago when he really peaked as a writer, but he was a best-selling author. He wrote about the Hells Angels. He wrote about contemporary politics. And he wrote a sort of Gonzo classic called Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas. All of that between the years of 1965 and 1975. And that made him essentially a cultural icon. For the rest of his life, he lived and continued to work for another 4 decades. But most of his peak work was published between 1965 and 1975.
How did you determine Thompson and his work were subjects worthy of you writing a book?
Well, I'd written about related topics for the last 10 years or so. I teach this material at San Francisco State University. But I was really always drawn to his voice, also his humor, of course. He was a really accomplished comic stylist and satirist. It was also his correspondence. There have been 2 fat volumes of edited correspondence that I've always found fascinating. I think sometimes that, as he suggested a couple of times, that his collected correspondence might have been his greatest work. Most people are attracted to his persona, which was a creation of his kind of so-called Gonzo journalism, which he developed in 1970 and continued to mine for the rest of his life.
Thompson wasn't necessarily known for humility. He claimed he was one of the best writers who used the English language as both a musical instrument and a political weapon. What exactly did he mean by that?
Well, he avoided some of the traps of traditional journalism, which really insisted on dry, kind of factual presentations. And he inserted quite a lot of his own personality and style, lots of invective, put downs, a lot of satire, a certain amount of hallucination. I mean, everything was in the first person, and he really let you into his world, which was quite extravagant. And so on the one hand, he wrote about people like Richard Nixon very effectively. A lot of people were writing about Richard Nixon, but his style was such that I think it made his work much more memorable. It was really coming from a completely different place, sort of unburdened by some of the routines of daily journalism.
The Washington Post published an article featuring your book a few weeks ago entitled "The Gonzo Journalist Who Forever Changed Political Campaign Coverage." How exactly did Thompson change political coverage, and how do you think campaign coverage has changed since Thompson's death in 2005?
Well, those are really great questions. I mean, and they have to do with the work that he did and not just his persona. I mean, when he started covering the 1972 presidential campaign, which he had never done before, he was doing it for Rolling Stone magazine, which was, maybe a 5-year-old rock magazine based in San Francisco. Nobody really cared what Rolling Stone thought about the presidential campaign. But he actually made an asset out of that, what seemed to be a huge liability. He came in and decided to just do what he always did, which was sort of offer the unvarnished truth as he understood it, not play the game, and also turn his own lens on the media. I mean, one of the things about Thompson that was really important about his work is that he both wrote about his topic, but he also wrote about the other ways that that topic was covered by other media outlets. So he had this kind of double vision in his most important work. And I think in many ways, it was the beginning of what we now think of as a pretty routine branch of journalism, which is media criticism.
And so on that note, what do you think Hunter Thompson's legacy is?
Well, he's certainly an iconoclast. I think to the culture at large, he's really known as this kind of swaggering party animal, and certainly there was a lot of truth to that. I'm a little bit more drawn to him as both as a struggling writer and as an innovator, and as somebody who had to he didn't sit down and say, you know what, I'm gonna invent Gonzo journalism today. It was a kind of improvisation that responded to all kinds of, I mean, there was nothing guaranteed about its success. Everything was a kind of crapshoot for him, and he really struggled with it. And I think there's a way that, we look back on it, we know it's been successful, and there's a tendency to think, well, yeah, of course he was successful. But nothing was guaranteed at the time, and it was the product of a long kind of apprenticeship and a lot of false starts and failures and setbacks. So I think one of the reasons I wrote the book was because I wanted him to also be remembered as an important American voice in the second half of the 20th century.
Quite a fascinating look back. Peter Richardson, thank you.
Thank you.